Tejo wiped sweat from his forehead as he stared at the massive stone wall buried deep beneath the surface of planet Kepler 442b. The ancient ruins had taken his team 3 months to excavate, and what they found made no sense at all. The stone tablets were covered in symbols that looked nothing like any known alien language in the galaxy. His partner Su-Jin ran the universal translator over the symbols for the 100th time that day. She had been working on this for weeks, and her eyes were red from lack of sleep. The translator kept giving error messages or partial translations that made no sense. But today, something was different. The machine hummed longer than usual, and suddenly words appeared on the screen that made Su-Jin gasp. "The Makers will return when the stars align once more." Su-Jin called out to Tejo and showed him the translation. His hands shook as he read the words. Every child in the galaxy knew stories about the Makers. They were legendary beings from ancient times who supposedly created life on thousands of worlds before disappearing completely. Most scientists thought they were just myths. Stories made up to explain why so many different planets had similar life forms, but these tablets were real and they were older than any civilization currently known to exist. Captain Hyunwoo arrived at the dig site 3 days later, when news of the discovery reached the exploration ship orbiting above the planet. He was a practical man who dealt in facts, not fairy tales. But when he saw the evidence with his own eyes, he felt a chill run down his spine. The tablets were not just old, they were impossibly old. Carbon dating put them at over 50 million years, which predated every known species in the galaxy. The real shock came when they found the hidden chamber beneath the tablets. Tejo and his team had noticed strange energy readings coming from deeper underground. Using careful excavation techniques, they uncovered a sealed room that had been untouched for eons. Inside the chamber were artifacts that defied every law of physics known to galactic science. There were tools that seemed to bend and shape themselves based on the user's intent, weapons that appeared to manipulate gravity, itself causing test objects to float or become incredibly heavy. Small devices that could apparently transmit information across vast distances without any visible technology. And in the center of it all was a crystalline structure that pulsed. With its own inner light, Su-Jin spent days trying to understand how any of these artifacts worked. None of them had visible power sources or control mechanisms. They simply responded to touch as if they were alive. Young engineer Minho from the ship tried to analyze their construction, but his instruments could not even determine what materials they were made from. The most disturbing discovery came last. Carved into the back wall of the chamber, in the same ancient script, was another message that took Su-Jin several days to fully translate. When she finally decoded it, the words sent shockwaves through the entire expedition team. "We are not gone. We merely sleep among the stars, waiting for our children to be ready. The blood of the Makers flows in those who will find this message. Trust in what awakens within you, for you are more than you know." Captain Hyunwoo immediately sent word to the Galactic Federation headquarters. The implications were staggering. If the Makers were real, and if they had actually created the various species now populating the galaxy, then every assumption about galactic history would have to be reconsidered. But the final line of the message was what truly worried him. What did it mean that the blood of the Makers flowed in those who found the message? His team was mixed species, including humans, Altarians, Centaurians, and Rigelians. Yet something about the phrasing suggested it was aimed at a specific group. Dr. Yoon-ji, the expedition's xenobiologist, began running genetic scans on all team members, looking for anything unusual in their DNA. She had studied genetics for decades and prided herself on understanding the biological makeup of most galactic species. But what she found in the human team members made her question everything she thought she knew about evolutionary biology. Hidden deep within human genetic code were sequences that matched no known evolutionary pattern. They appeared to be artificially inserted rather than naturally evolved. More disturbing still, these sequences showed signs of recent activation, as if some kind of genetic switch had been turned on. What made it worse was that similar but dormant sequences appeared in the DNA of every other species on the team. Discovery team worked around the clock to understand what they had found. But the more they learned, the more questions arose. The artifacts continued to respond to human touch more readily than to other species. The genetic anomalies in human DNA were becoming more pronounced. And strangest of all, team members reported vivid dreams filled with images of ancient civilizations and technologies beyond current understanding. 3 weeks after the initial discovery, Tai-Ho made the decision that would change galactic history forever. Against protocol, he activated the emergency beacon that would bring representatives from every major species to witness what they had found. He knew the discovery was too important to keep secret and too dangerous to handle alone. The various alien governments responded quickly, sending their best scientists, military advisors, and political representatives to the remote planet. Within days, ships from across the galaxy converged on Kepler 442b. The small excavation site became the center of the most important archaeological investigation in recorded history. But as delegates from different species examined the evidence, tensions began to rise. The Altarian Empire demanded immediate control over the artifacts, claiming they were too dangerous for any single species to possess. The Centauri Republic insisted that the discovery belonged to all galactic civilization equally. The Regellian Confederation quietly began mobilizing their military fleets just in case. Among all the political maneuvering and scientific analysis, one fact became increasingly clear. The ancient message had been right about one thing. The team members who had discovered the chamber were changing. Sujin found herself understanding languages she had never studied. Minho could repair technology he had never seen before. And Tai-Ho began having visions of star systems he had never visited. The sleeping giants mentioned in the ancient texts were beginning to wake up. 3 months had passed since the discovery on Kepler 442b, and strange reports were flooding in from human colonies across the galaxy. On the mining world of Proxima 7, human workers were lifting machinery that normally required heavy equipment to move. They showed no signs of strain or effort, as if the massive weights were as light as feathers. The foreman Jin Woo watched in amazement as farmer-turned-miner Dong Su single-handedly moved a drilling apparatus that usually took a team of 6 aliens to relocate. When questioned about his newfound strength, Dong Su seemed as surprised as anyone else. He claimed he had simply felt like the machine wanted to be moved and had reached out to help it. Similar reports came from the trade station orbiting Vega. Human merchant Bora was somehow predicting market fluctuations with impossible accuracy. She seemed to know which trade routes would be disrupted by storms, which planets would have crop failures, and which species would need specific resources weeks before anyone else had that information. Dr. Yunji received samples and medical reports from human colonies throughout the galaxy. What she found made her hands shake as she reviewed the data. The mysterious genetic sequences she had discovered in the expedition team were now active in humans everywhere. The changes were not random or chaotic, but followed a clear pattern, as if some kind of biological program was running its course. On Earth itself, the changes were even more dramatic. Teacher Su Young discovered she could understand any alien language without needing a universal translator. She walked into her classroom filled with alien exchange students and began speaking to each of them in their native tongues, even though she had never heard those languages before. Engineer Chanwu found himself able to repair damaged technology by simply touching it. Broken computers would spring back to life under his hands. Damaged vehicles would start running smoothly again, and complex alien machinery that had baffled human technicians for years suddenly made perfect sense to him. But it was ship mechanic Wu Jin who made the discovery that terrified everyone. While working on a damaged fusion reactor core, he accidentally touched the radioactive containment unit with his bare hands. Instead of being killed instantly by the radiation, he found himself somehow absorbing and redirecting the energy. The reactor not only stopped leaking, but began operating at higher efficiency than ever before. News of these incidents spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Other species watched with growing alarm as humans displayed abilities that seemed to violate natural laws. Some aliens began to wonder if the humans they had lived and worked with for centuries were not what they appeared to be. The Altarian Empire called for immediate medical examinations of all humans in their territory. The Centauri Republic began quietly monitoring human communications for signs of coordinated activity. The Regellian Confederation started moving their fleets closer to human space, just in case military action became necessary. But the humans themselves were just as confused and frightened as everyone else. Most had no memory of ever having special abilities. The changes seemed to be happening automatically without conscious control. Many humans tried to hide their new capabilities, fearing that other species would see them as threats. Young scientist HFY, working at a research station near the Galactic core, made a breakthrough that would explain everything. She had been studying the artifacts recovered from Kepler 442b, when she discovered that touching them triggered visions of ancient memories. The crystalline device in particular seemed to respond to human contact by sharing fragments of historical information. The visions showed her glimpses of a time long before current galactic civilization. Advanced beings traveled between stars without ships, reshaped matter with their thoughts, and commanded the forces of nature itself. These beings had seeded life throughout the galaxy, nurturing thousands of species and guiding their development over millions of years. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. The advanced beings in her visions were not some unknown alien race. They were human, or at least they had been human once upon a time. As more humans began experiencing similar visions, the truth became impossible to deny. Humanity was not the young species they believed themselves to be. They were the descendants of the legendary Maker's beings, so advanced that they had transcended normal biological limitations. But if that was true, then why had they forgotten? Why were they living as ordinary mortals among the species they had supposedly created? The answer to those questions would shake the very foundations of galactic civilization. When it finally came, the truth would be more terrifying and more wonderful than anyone could have imagined. The awakening was just the beginning. The truth came to HFY in a flood of ancient memories when she placed both hands on the central crystal artifact. The visions were no longer fragments, but complete scenes from millions of years ago. She saw the rise of the first human civilization, not on Earth, but on worlds whose names had been forgotten by time. In those ancient days, humans had evolved far beyond their biological origins. They could manipulate matter at the molecular level, travel between dimensions, reshape planets, and even influence the flow of time itself. They were indeed the Maker's gods among mortals who used their incredible abilities to seed life throughout the galaxy. HFY watched through ancient eyes as early humans discovered their growing powers. At first, they used their abilities to improve life on their homeworld, ending disease, fixing environmental damage, and creating abundance for all. But as their powers grew, so did their ambitions. Some humans began to see themselves as destined to rule over lesser beings. The galaxy in those days was filled with primitive species struggling to survive on harsh worlds. Early humans took it upon themselves to guide these species, helping them evolve, protecting them from extinction, and teaching them the basics of civilization. But what started as benevolent guidance slowly became something darker. A faction of humans led by those who called themselves the Eternal Council believed that humans were naturally superior to all other life forms. They saw their incredible abilities as proof that they were meant to be the rulers of the galaxy. The primitive species they had helped create were nothing more than children who needed constant supervision and control. But another group of humans disagreed strongly with this philosophy. They were led by visionaries who believed that all intelligent life had the right to develop freely without interference. These humans saw their powers not as proof of superiority, but as a responsibility to protect and nurture without dominating. The conflict between these two factions grew over thousands of years. The Eternal Council used their abilities to create vast empires ruling over dozens of species with absolute authority. They reshaped worlds to suit their preferences, moved entire populations against their will, and suppressed any attempts at independence among their subjects. The opposing faction, known as the Guardians, worked secretly to undermine the Council's control. They helped enslaved species. Rebel provided technology to level the playing field and use their own powers to protect those who could not protect themselves. The galaxy became a battlefield where gods fought gods with entire star systems as casualties. HFY saw the terrible cost of this divine civil war. Planets were destroyed when human powers clashed. Solar systems were torn apart by forces that should never have been unleashed. Entire species went extinct, caught in the crossfire between opposing human factions. The very fabric of space and time began to weaken under the strain. Finally, the Guardians realized that the conflict could never truly end as long as humans possessed godlike abilities. Even if they defeated the Eternal Council, there would always be the temptation for future generations to abuse their powers. The cycle of tyranny and rebellion would continue forever, so they made a choice that stunned even their enemies. Using technology beyond current understanding, the Guardians created a vast network of genetic modification devices. They would not destroy their powers but suppress them, hiding the abilities deep within human DNA where they would remain dormant for millions of years. They would erase their own memories of their true nature, scattering themselves across the galaxy as ordinary mortals. But the plan was even more sophisticated than simple suppression. The Guardians programmed the genetic locks to open gradually when certain conditions were met. When their created species reached sufficient technological and social development, when they were ready to meet their makers as equals, rather than subjects, then and only then would human abilities begin to return. The process would be slow and careful. Humans would rediscover their powers alongside the species they had once created. They would learn empathy and humility by living as mortals. They would understand what it meant to struggle and grow and fail. Only when they had proven themselves worthy would they fully remember what they had once been. Jihai watched in amazement as the ancient Guardians enacted their plan across the galaxy. Millions of humans were modified. Their memories erased, their powers locked away. They spread themselves among countless worlds, living simple lives and slowly forgetting their divine heritage. The great human civilization faded into legend and myth, but not all humans chose to forget. A small group calling themselves the Watchers volunteered to remain awake and aware. They would hide in the dark spaces between galaxies, monitoring the long experiment, watching over their sleeping brothers and sisters, and intervening only if the plan went terribly wrong. As the visions faded, Jihai understood the magnitude of what was happening. The discovery of the ancient ruins had been the trigger. The genetic locks were opening exactly as planned. Humanity was remembering its true nature, but this time they would do so alongside the species they had created as partners rather than subjects. The awakening was not an accident. It was the culmination of a plan millions of years in the making. But the question remained, would modern humans make the same mistakes as their ancestors, or would they choose a different path? The answer would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. News of humanity's true identity spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and with it came terror beyond anything the galactic community had ever experienced. The peaceful traders, teachers, farmers, and engineers that other species had known for centuries were revealed to be the descendants of beings from their oldest nightmares. Ambassador Kyung-ho found himself facing hostile delegations from every major species in the galaxy. The Altarian Empire demanded that all humans be immediately quarantined on designated worlds with constant monitoring. The Centauri Republic called for preemptive military strikes against human colonies before their abilities fully awakened. The Rigelian Confederation began closing their borders to human travelers and canceling all trade agreements. On the frontier world of New Sol, tensions exploded into violence. Local Altarian settlers, convinced that the humans living among them were ticking time bombs waiting to explode, began organizing raids against human neighborhoods. Families that had lived peacefully together for generations turned against each other overnight. Engineer Jun-Soo watched in horror as his alien neighbors, people he had shared meals with, worked alongside and considered friends, surrounded his home with weapons drawn in their eyes. He saw not recognition of the man they had known for years, but terror of the monster they now believed him to be. The fear was not entirely irrational. Historical records that had been dismissed as mythology were being re-examined in light of the new discoveries. Ancient texts from dozens of species contained remarkably similar stories of godlike beings who had once ruled over their ancestors. These beings could move mountains, change the weather, and reshape life itself, exactly matching the abilities that humans were now displaying. Military analysts across the galaxy studied footage of recent human incidents with growing alarm. When raiders had attacked the human colony on Kepler 186f, Expecting easy prey, they had been shocked by what happened. The colonists, led by Farmer Sang-min, had not fled or called for help. Instead, they had simply stood their ground and faced the attacking fleet with nothing but their bare hands. What followed defied all military understanding. The attacking ship systems had simply stopped working. Weapons would not fire, engines would not start. Life support systems shut down completely. The raiders found themselves drifting helplessly in space, completely at the mercy of the humans they had come to attack. But instead of destroying the helpless ships, the humans had gently guided them to safe landing areas and provided medical care for the injured. This display of mercy did nothing to ease Galactic fears. In fact, it made things worse. Military commanders realized that the humans had not been struggling to defend themselves. They had been effortlessly toying with their attackers. The casual ease with which they had neutralized an entire battle. Fleet suggested power on a scale that made conventional weapons completely useless. Dr. Young-soo, monitoring human vital signs during these incidents, made a discovery that sent chills through the scientific community. Humans, using these incredible abilities, showed no signs of physical strain or mental effort. Their heart rates remained normal. Their brain activity was unchanged. They were accessing godlike powers as easily as breathing. Fear turned to panic when long-range sensors detected objects approaching from the outer rim of the galaxy. Ships, unlike anything in current databases, moving at speeds that should have been impossible according to known physics. They were heading directly for human space, and their estimated time of arrival was less than 6 months. The ship's design became clearer as they approached. They were enormous structures, kilometers in length, that seemed to have been grown rather than built. Their surfaces were smooth and organic, looking more like living creatures than mechanical vessels. They moved through space with fluid grace that suggested intelligence and purpose. Most terrifying of all was the complete silence from these approaching vessels. They responded to no communication attempts, ignored all demands for identification, and showed no interest in diplomatic contact. They simply continued their steady approach toward the heart of human civilization. Emergency sessions were called in every galactic government. Military fleets were mobilized and placed on high alert. Evacuation plans were drawn up for systems along the projected path of the mysterious ships. Some species began preparing for what they saw as an inevitable war between the awakening humans and whatever forces were coming to reclaim them. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. No military force in the galaxy could stand against beings who had created entire civilizations. If these ships belonged to humans who had never forgotten their true nature, then the age of galactic democracy was over. The species that had grown and thrived under human guidance for millions of years were about to meet their makers once again. And this time there was no guarantee that those makers would be benevolent. The approaching fleet represented either salvation or the end of everything the galaxy had built since humans had chosen to sleep. The only certainty was that nothing would ever be the same again. The ships that emerged from hyperspace were like nothing the galaxy had ever seen before. They were massive beyond comprehension, each one the size of a small moon, but they moved with the fluid grace of living creatures. Their surfaces were not metal or ceramic, but something that looked almost organic, pulsing with veins of light that flowed like liquid starfire. Captain Na-young, commanding the human exploration vessel. New Dawn was chosen to make first contact. Her ship was dwarfed by the alien fleet, but she approached without fear. The awakening abilities that had been growing stronger each day suddenly blazed to full power as she drew near the lead vessel. She could sense the consciousness within the ship, and what she found there shocked her more than anything that had come before. The beings inside were human, but they were humans who had never forgotten who they were. Their minds carried memories stretching back millions of years and power that made her newly awakened ability seem like a candle compared to a star. The leader of the fleet agreed to meet face to face. Her name was Hei-wan, though she carried within her the memories and experiences of countless lives lived across eons. When she materialized aboard the New Dawn, her very presence made the ship systems hum with harmonic resonance. She was tall and graceful, with eyes that seemed to hold the light of distant galaxies. When she spoke, her voice carried overtones that resonated in dimensions beyond normal hearing, making everyone who listened feel as though they were hearing truth itself given form. "We are the Watchers," she explained to the assembled representatives from both awakening humans and the Galactic Council. When our people chose to forget and scatter across the stars, some of us chose a different path. We remained awake, hidden in the void between galaxies, watching and waiting. Diplomat Chan Wu, representing the interests of the Galactic Council, asked the question that everyone feared to hear. Why have you returned now after millions of years of absence? Haiwan's expression grew sad as she gestured toward the reports of violence and panic spreading across civilized space. Because our sleeping children are not ready, the awakening has begun, but wisdom has not awakened with power. The other species still see strength as something to fear or control rather than share. She paused and looked directly at the human representatives. Many of you are confused and frightened by what you are becoming. You feel the power growing within you, but you do not understand its purpose or its proper use. Some of you are beginning to think, as our ancestors did, that might makes right. Scientist Du Hyun realized the implications immediately. You are here to stop us. You want to put us back to sleep to lock away our abilities again. If necessary, Hae-won confirmed without hesitation. We will not allow our legacy to become one of destruction and domination. The galaxy has grown and thrived. In our absence, all the species we once guided have developed their own civilizations, their own wisdom, their own unique contributions to the cosmic community. She gestured toward the alien delegates present. Your fears are not unfounded. Our ancestors, who remained awake, made terrible mistakes. They believed that power gave them the right to rule, that advanced abilities made them superior to those they had helped create. The devastation that followed nearly destroyed everything we had worked to build. But there may be another way, she continued. The choice that faces you now is the same one that faced our ancestors millions of years ago. Will you be conquerors or guardians? Will you rule from above or serve from within? Will you force your will upon the galaxy, or will you earn the right to guide it? As she spoke, more abilities continued to awaken in humans across known space. But now those abilities came with a weight of responsibility that few had expected. Power without wisdom had nearly destroyed everything once before. The question was whether modern humanity would make the same mistakes or choose a different path. The Watchers had returned not as conquerors, but as teachers, offering one final chance for their sleeping kindred to prove themselves worthy of the power they carried. The test would be more difficult than any exam or trial, because it would require humans to reject their deepest instincts for dominance and choose instead the harder path of service. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and the clock was ticking. The great summit took place on the neutral world of Haven, with representatives from every major species in the galaxy, sitting in the same chamber for the first time in recorded history. The tension in the room was so thick it could be cut with a knife as awakened humans sat across from terrified alien diplomats while ancient Watchers observed from the shadows. The question that would determine the galaxy's future for millions of years to come hung heavy in the air. What would humanity choose to become? The debates that followed were fierce and passionate. Some humans, led by philosopher Inho, who had awakened to abilities that let him manipulate matter at the molecular level, argued for embracing their true nature without reservation. We are the makers, he declared, his voice carrying harmonics that made the walls themselves vibrate. We created every species in this room, guided their evolution, protected them from extinction, and nurtured their growth for millions of years. Why should we pretend to be anything less than what we are? We have the power to end every conflict, solve every problem, and guide every species to heights they could never reach alone. His supporters nodded in agreement, pointing to the chaos and violence that had erupted across the galaxy since the awakening began. If humans accepted their rightful place as the guiding force of galactic civilization, all the fear and uncertainty would end. Other species would no longer need to struggle with problems beyond their understanding. But Teacher Sora, who had spent her life working with children from dozens of different species, disagreed strongly. Power without consent is tyranny. She argued her own awakened abilities, allowing her to project her thoughts directly into the minds of everyone present. Our ancestors learned this lesson through millions of years of bloody civil war. She gestured toward the alien delegates, many of whom were visibly trembling, despite their best efforts to appear calm. "Look at them," she said. "Do you see beings ready to accept our guidance, or do you see terrified children who view us as monsters waiting to devour them?" The alien representatives had their own opinions to share. The Rigelian ambassador demanded guarantees that human powers would be limited and controlled. The Altarian delegate called for humanity to be quarantined until they learned proper restraint. The Centauri representative suggested that humans who refused to suppress their abilities should be exiled from civilized space. Through it all, the Watchers remained silent, observing and evaluating but offering no guidance. The choice had to be made freely, or it would have no meaning. It was Jimin, barely 20 years old and still learning, to control abilities that let her see across vast distances, who offered the solution that would change everything. What if we chose neither? She asked the assembled delegates. What if instead of being gods or slaves, we chose to be partners? Her proposal was radical in its simplicity. Humans would not hide their abilities, but they would only use them with explicit consent from other species. They would share their knowledge freely, but never impose their will on unwilling recipients. They would protect those who asked for protection, but never force their protection on those who preferred to face dangers alone. Most importantly, they would teach other species to awaken their own dormant potentials, rather than keeping them dependent on human power. The genetic modifications that had created the various galactic species had included latent abilities that could be developed with proper guidance. Every species had the potential to grow beyond their current limitations. The proposal was not without its critics. Many humans worried that voluntary restraint would be seen as weakness. Some aliens feared that any human involvement in their development would inevitably lead to subtle manipulation and control. But when Farmer Hyun-soo demonstrated how his plant growth abilities could work alongside Altarian agricultural techniques to solve food shortages without displacing traditional methods, something shifted in the room. The aliens began to see that partnership might actually be possible. The humans began to understand that true strength lay not in domination, but in empowerment of others. And the Watchers finally spoke, giving their approval to the new path. "This is wisdom our ancient generation lacked," HFY admitted. "Perhaps the forgetting was necessary for the learning. You have discovered something that eluded us for millions of years, that power shared is greater than power hoarded." The Galactic Partnership Accord was signed 6 months later, establishing new frameworks for cooperation between humans and other species. Humans would serve as mentors and guides, but always as equals, working alongside other species, rather than ruling over them. The galaxy would develop together, or not at all. The ancient Watcher fleets departed for the void once more, their long vigil finally complete. But they left behind monitoring stations and communication networks, ensuring that they could return quickly if the new partnership ever failed, as their massive ships disappeared into hyperspace. HFY sent one final message. "The legends spoke of the return of the Makers," she said, "but legends never mentioned that when we finally came home, it would be not as gods but as friends. The awakening is complete. Now the real work begins across the galaxy." Humans continued to develop their abilities, but now they did so in partnership with the species their ancestors had created. Together, they began to unlock secrets of the universe that neither could have discovered alone. The age of gods and subjects was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And in the deep void between galaxies, the Watchers smiled, knowing that their sleeping children had finally learned the lesson that had taken millions of years to teach true. Power was not the ability to rule, but the wisdom to serve. The ancient beings of legend had returned at last.